There's a particular feeling that settles in after certain conversations. Not the sharp sting of an argument or the clear hurt of direct criticism, but something more elusive. You walk away feeling somehow diminished, though nothing overtly harmful occurred. The interaction seemed reasonable, even caring, yet you find yourself replaying it, searching for what went wrong. This unease isn't dramatic. It's the quiet recognition that something shifted inside you during that exchange. Something you can't quite name. You might notice it after explaining yourself more thoroughly than the situation seemed to warrant. Or after finding yourself agreeing to something you hadn't initially wanted to do, not through force or manipulation you could identify, but through a process that felt almost collaborative. The other person listened, asked thoughtful questions, expressed concern for your well-being. They helped you see angles you hadn't considered, potential consequences you might face. By the end, your original position seemed naive, even selfish. Their way forward felt not just reasonable, but inevitable. This feeling intensifies when you realize how often these conversations happen with the same person. Each time you enter with your own perspective and leave having adopted theirs. Each time the process feels natural, even helpful. They're not demanding compliance, they're helping you think things through. They're not dismissing your feelings, they're helping you understand them better. Yet somehow your internal compass begins to point consistently in their direction. The shift happens so gradually that you don't notice the accumulation. One conversation where they help you see the flaws in a plan you were excited about. Another where they guide you toward recognizing patterns in your behavior that might be problematic. A third where they help you understand why your initial reaction to a situation might be misguided. Each interaction feels beneficial in isolation, but together they create something more significant, a systematic reorientation of how you process your own experience. Consider how this unfolds in the most ordinary circumstances. You mention feeling tired after work, and they respond with genuine concern, asking detailed questions about your schedule, your sleep, your stress levels. They listen intently as you describe your day, nodding with understanding. Then they begin to connect dots you hadn't seen, how your tiredness might be affecting your judgment, how it could impact important decisions you need to make. They're not telling you what to do, they're simply helping you recognize patterns. By the conversation's end, you're grateful for their insight and slightly worried about your own ability to assess your state accurately. Or perhaps you express excitement about a new opportunity, and they respond with enthusiasm that gradually shifts into thoughtful concern. They ask probing questions about the details, the timeline, the people involved. They share relevant experiences, both positive and cautionary. They help you consider potential challenges you might face, resources you might need, ways things could go wrong. Their questions feel supportive, their concerns legitimate. Yet you leave the conversation feeling less certain about something that had previously energized you, more aware of your own inexperience and potential blind spots. Maybe you share frustration about a conflict with a friend, and they listen with empathy before gently suggesting that your perspective might be incomplete. They don't dismiss your feelings, but they help you consider what the other person might have been experiencing, what pressures they might be under, how your own actions might have contributed to the situation. They guide you toward seeing the complexity you initially missed, the nuance that your emotional reaction obscured. You end up feeling more mature, more understanding, but also somehow less certain about your ability to read situations accurately. These interactions create a subtle but persistent dynamic. You begin to anticipate their perspective before sharing your own thoughts. You find yourself mentally rehearsing explanations for decisions you haven't yet made, imagining their questions and preparing your responses. This isn't conscious strategizing, it's an automatic adjustment, like turning toward a light source without realizing you're doing it. The conditioning operates below the level of conscious awareness. You don't notice that you've started framing your experiences in terms they would find meaningful, or that you've begun evaluating your choices against standards they've helped you recognize. You don't see that your spontaneous reactions have become filtered through anticipation of their analysis. The change feels like growth, like developing better judgment and more sophisticated thinking. The mechanism underlying this shift operates through three interconnected processes that compound over time. First, there's the establishment of informational asymmetry. Through their careful questioning and your detailed responses, they accumulate comprehensive knowledge about your thoughts, feelings, circumstances, and decision making patterns. Meanwhile, their own internal processes remain largely opaque. They share selectively, offering insights, experiences, and observations that feel generous and helpful, but rarely revealing their own uncertainties, mistakes, or internal conflicts. This asymmetry creates a foundation for the second process, the conditioning of explanation and justification. Each interaction reinforces the pattern where you provide detailed accounts of your reasoning while they offer analysis and guidance. You become accustomed to defending positions you previously held with quiet confidence, not because they're attacking those positions, but because their thoughtful questions reveal complexities you hadn't considered. Over time, you internalize this dynamic, automatically subjecting your own thoughts to the kind of scrutiny they've modeled. The third process involves the gradual redefinition of autonomy itself. Independence begins to feel less like making your own decisions and more like making well-informed decisions. Self-reliance transforms from trusting your instincts to thoroughly analyzing all angles. What once felt like personal agency now seems like impulsiveness or naivety. Their involvement doesn't feel like interference. It feels like wisdom, like the kind of careful consideration you should have been doing all along. These processes interweave to create a psychological environment where dependence feels like growth. You're not losing your ability to think. You're learning to think better. You're not becoming submissive. You're becoming more thoughtful. You're not losing yourself. You're becoming a more mature version of yourself, one who considers consequences and seeks input before making important decisions. The transformation happens through repetition rather than force. Each conversation follows a similar pattern. You share something, they respond with interest and concern, they ask questions that reveal complexity you hadn't considered. They help you reach conclusions that feel more sophisticated than your original thoughts. The pattern becomes comfortable, even addictive. Their attention feels validating, their questions feel caring, their insights feel valuable. You begin to seek out these interactions, not because you feel dependent, but because they consistently help you think more clearly. You start bringing them problems before you've fully formed your own opinions about them, not because you can't think for yourself, but because their input invariably improves your analysis. You find yourself postponing decisions until you've had a chance to discuss them, not because you need permission, but because their perspective consistently reveals important factors you would have missed. The internal consequences of this conditioning are profound yet difficult to detect because they emerge gradually and feel like improvements. You develop heightened self-monitoring, constantly evaluating your thoughts and impulses against standards that have become internalized but weren't originally your own. This vigilance feels like wisdom, like the kind of self-awareness that prevents poor decisions and embarrassing mistakes. Your decision-making process becomes increasingly elaborate. Simple choices that once felt straightforward now require extensive analysis. You find yourself considering multiple perspectives, potential outcomes, and unintended consequences for decisions that previously felt intuitive. This thoroughness seems like maturity, like the kind of careful consideration that responsible adults engage in. You begin to experience what might be called anticipatory justification, mentally preparing explanations for choices before you've fully made them. This isn't paranoia or fear, but a kind of intellectual preparation that feels prudent. You want to be able to articulate your reasoning clearly to demonstrate that you've thought things through properly. The fact that this preparation consistently leads you toward choices they would approve of seems like evidence of your improved judgment rather than evidence of conditioning. Your internal reference points gradually shift. What once felt like confidence now seems like overconfidence. What once felt like intuition now seems like impulsiveness. What once felt like independence now seems like isolation. These shifts don't happen through criticism or correction, but through the slow accumulation of experiences where their perspective proved more comprehensive, more nuanced, more accurate than your initial instincts. The erosion of decisiveness follows naturally from these changes, not because you've lost the ability to make decisions, but because you've learned to recognize how complex most decisions actually are. You've developed an appreciation for the many factors that should be considered, the various ways things can go wrong, The importance of seeking input from those with more experience or insight. What feels like wisdom is actually the systematic undermining of your capacity for autonomous judgment. Perhaps most significantly, you lose access to your own internal experience as a valid source of information. Your feelings, instincts, and immediate reactions become data points to be analyzed rather than guidance to be trusted. When something feels wrong, you don't trust that feeling. You examine it, question it, seek external validation for it. When something feels right, you don't act on that feeling. You investigate it, test it against other perspectives, ensure it can withstand scrutiny. This shift happens so gradually that it feels like emotional maturity rather than psychological conditioning. You congratulate yourself on becoming less reactive, more thoughtful, better at considering multiple viewpoints before reaching conclusions. You don't recognize that you've lost the ability to trust your immediate responses, that you've become dependent on external validation for internal experiences. The relationship with your own emotions becomes increasingly mediated. Instead of feeling angry and trusting that anger as information about a situation, you feel angry and immediately begin analyzing whether that anger is justified, proportionate, helpful. Instead of feeling excited and allowing that excitement to guide your energy, you feel excited and immediately begin questioning whether that excitement is based on realistic expectations, whether it's blinding you to potential problems. This psychological dependence doesn't announce itself. There's no moment of recognition where you suddenly realize you've lost your autonomy. Instead, there's a gradual awareness that you've become someone who needs guidance, who benefits from oversight, who makes better decisions when they are involved in the process. This feels like self-knowledge rather than dependency, like maturity rather than conditioning. The relationship becomes essential not because they've made themselves indispensable through manipulation, but because they've helped you recognize your own limitations and blind spots. They've shown you how much better your decisions can be when you have their input, how much clearer your thinking becomes when filtered through their perspective. You don't feel controlled. You feel supported, guided, helped to become your best self. The dependency solidifies through what feels like evidence. Time after time, their guidance proves valuable. Decisions made with their input tend to work out better than decisions made independently. Problems they help you anticipate do indeed arise. Perspectives they encourage you to consider do indeed prove relevant. This track record feels like validation of their wisdom and confirmation of your need for their guidance. You begin to interpret your own resistance to their input as evidence of your limitations rather than evidence of your autonomy. When you feel reluctant to share something with them, you see this as defensiveness or pride rather than healthy boundaries. When you want to make a decision without their input, you see this as impulsiveness rather than independence. Your own instincts become suspect, while their guidance becomes increasingly authoritative. Yet somewhere beneath this gratitude and growth, that original unease persists. It surfaces in quiet moments, when you realize how thoroughly your internal landscape has been reshaped, how your thoughts automatically organize themselves around their likely responses, how your sense of what's reasonable, what's wise, what's mature, has become indistinguishable from what they would approve of. How the person you've become, through their guidance, feels both more sophisticated and somehow less authentically yours. This recognition brings no relief, no clear path forward, no obvious solution. It simply sits there, a quiet understanding of how thoroughly and invisibly the architecture of your autonomy has been rebuilt. How what felt like growth was actually a kind of careful demolition. How what seemed like wisdom was actually the systematic replacement of your internal guidance system with theirs. The weight of this understanding settles in slowly, carrying with it the unsettling clarity of seeing a pattern you can no longer unsee, and the uncomfortable knowledge that recognizing it doesn't automatically restore what was lost.